Chinese money launderers have partnered with Mexican drug cartels to efficiently launder the proceeds of the fentanyl trafficking.
Law enforcement in this country has not got sufficient tools to tackle it.
They're really on the rise as the dominant money laundering networks.
Abbiamo certificato che venivano qui a consegnare emissari di famiglie criminali dai più disparati territori nazionali.
These are franchise models, highly sophisticated. They could be stood up quickly and move a lot of value in a lot of different directions simultaneously.
The scale and the scope of this is really quite extraordinary.
We started bringing all the elements of the government together because it was a national security issue. It was a matter of life and death.
In 2017 and 18, something significant happened. We didn't know why. We couldn't understand why. Suddenly, Chinese money brokers began to control the laundering of Mexican cartel proceeds. And they started to do it for 1% to 2%. Those were charges or broker fees that were unheard of. We believe that the Mexican cartels increased their bottom line, their net profits, by 3% to 5% by simply partnering with Chinese money launderers.
In the 1990s, as China liberalized economically, as Chinese business started moving around the world, a system of Chinese underground banking or money exchange system developed in places where Chinese businesses were expanding, catering to businesses often operating with legal commodities in legal economies, but needing to move money they would not be able to move through the Chinese banking system.
And what these underground banks do is they transfer money according to something that's called mirror transfer. A person, let's say, on the one end of the network will arrive with a sack full of money in cash, deposit it at the underground bank, and then through this mirror transfer, another person will pick up the same amount of money from the other branch of the same underground banking network. The crucial thing about this is that no money has actually been transferred. It's completely invisible to the authorities that might wish to crack down on it. This illicit money finances all kinds of things. It finances shopping sprees by Chinese consumers who want to buy luxury in Europe. It also finances, we have evidence, the international drugs trade, and is particularly germane when we think of the big crisis of fentanyl that's currently affecting the United States.
As we continue our coverage, the DEA reports fentanyl overdose. It is the leading cause of death among those under the age of 50. And they're warning communities that one pill can kill.
It's the deadliest drug threat our country has ever faced.
I cover law enforcement here in New York for the Financial Times, and in the course of meeting with a former DEA agent in a Manhattan skyscraper, halfway through our meeting, he said, "Forget what you're working on now, I have a far bigger story that's being ignored." The fentanyl crisis, that is probably the biggest killer of Americans under 50, is being fueled by Chinese money laundering, and law enforcement in this country has not got sufficient tools to tackle it. For decades, the drug cartels operating in the US had developed a very sophisticated system for money laundering. They would put the cash on trucks, they would drive them across the border, they would find ways of sending the money to people in the US who needed cash and would buy products with them, etc. But the DEA and enforcement agencies across America had a playbook for how to tackle this. All of that changed with the fentanyl crisis. When I first heard about this, a few people told me, you have to speak to this guy, Ray Donovan. He'd be one of the first to identify this problem. Suddenly, Chinese nationals were popping up everywhere in the surveillance of the fentanyl trade to an extent that they hadn't been before. And he and his team realized something was going on here.
My name is Raymond Donovan. I am the former chief of operations for the Drug Enforcement Administration. So I grew up in an Irish neighborhood up in the Bronx. But then we moved to a neighborhood where it was all Puerto Rican. I saw drugs decimate parts of my family in the 70s, in particular heroin. I became an expert not only in the cartel, but really being able to exploit comms or communications. In the mid-90s, cocaine was just falling from the sky. My first year, we seized here in New York City 7,000 kilos of cocaine. When you're intercepting tens of thousands of kilos, you're really causing a lot of harm to the cartel. We were focused in primarily on tractor trailers coming from the West Coast to the East Coast. In 2012, I was assigned to the Special Ops Division. SOD is basically the hub for the world as it relates to narcotics investigations and criminal networks. While at SOD, I developed a team. We collectively pursued Chapo Guzman. We never really focused in on Chinese organized crime. Our focus was on the Sinaloa cartel. Yeah, we're in Brooklyn, near to downtown Brooklyn. It's a warehouse area. It's an area that is known for receiving shipments of drugs coming in from Mexico or from other states across the United States. We started realizing that the Chinese organized crime was not only involved with supplying all the precursor chemicals to Mexican cartels for production of illicit narcotics, they were also really taking over the international money laundering aspects of the entire drug trafficking as we know it across the United States.
Another fentanyl bust in the Bronx, just blocks away from the daycare where a 1-year-old boy died.
We would see an organization that we identified through our investigation that was a fentanyl distribution network, dropping off drug proceeds to a Chinese money launderer here in New York City. And then that launderer would then bring money through our investigation to an MSB or money service provider in Flushing, Queens. And from there, we would launch a different sort of investigation that became more about following the paper trail of how the money is leaving through these stores because they were fronts. Often you'll see a business that from the outside looking in, it looks like it's one business, but once you walk inside, there's multiple businesses within. And that's where you'll see that they'll have a money service provider set up to launder illicit drug proceeds on behalf of the criminal organizations.
We had a saying, all roads lead back to Flushing. The reason we said that is we identified command and control, leadership. All these things sort of centered back to Flushing, Queens. My name's Chris Urban. I'm a managing director with Nardello & Co., which is a global investigations firm. Prior to Nardello, I spent 24 years with the DEA as a special agent. This is Mexico, this is the United States, and this is China. The currencies do not cross borders. The pesos, the dollars, the Chinese RMB. Think of billion-dollar pots of each currency in those countries. Let's look at the Mexican cartels. They produce fentanyl. They ship a large shipment of fentanyl to New York to a drug distribution gang in New York. They then sell that fentanyl, and they say they have $1 million that they need to have laundered back to the Mexican drug cartel. They contact the cartel and say, we have $1 million that we want to move back to you. They contact the Chinese money broker in Mexico. That Chinese money broker, via WeChat, contacts a Chinese broker in New York, saying $1 million needs to be picked up. Mexican cartel contacts their drug distribution arm and says, this Chinese broker is going to pick up the $1 million. They arrange for that pickup. It's brought back to a stash location where they're collecting drug proceeds controlled by this Chinese money broker. Chinese money broker sees that the money is there, $1 million. WeChat messages the Chinese money broker and says, I have the $1 million. At this point in time, those funds are released to the Mexican cartel. They've now been made whole. Their funds have been laundered for them. That $1 million now is sitting in a stash house controlled by Chinese money launderers. They then get on WeChat or a bulletin board and advertise the sale of those US dollars within the United States. Once those dollars were put on WeChat, Chinese nationals, whether they be back in mainland China or within the United States, want to buy dollars. In this example, he's going to buy $100,000. This Chinese national has been introduced by this Chinese broker in mainland China by this Chinese broker. Before he actually gives them the funds, the transfer is made bank to bank. As soon as that's done, he provides the cashier's check or the funds. He now has the funds, he's done. He's made his money, he's invested in the US. In the beginning of this, we were trying to understand it. We were following these individuals and they were picking up millions of dollars. They followed one of these Chinese couriers who had picked up money back to a block and lost him on surveillance, right? Now, it was later at night, it was dark, it was in Flushing, Queens, and they decided, let's get out, let's walk the block and determine if we can see where he went or where he was. As they were walking down the street, they heard what they thought to be money counters, right? So when they went closer to this building, on the first floor, they had had the window open just a little bit. And there were 6 to 8 money counters being run and over $10 million in this stash location. That was the amount of money that they had to bring in, count. Showed the flow of money because they were selling that money the next day to a Chinese buyer that wanted to invest in the United States. Now you can couple that around the world. You could say that in Africa, we noticed Chinese organized crime where there was a Chinese diaspora, right? And there was a Chinese infrastructure project and dramatic amounts of money. Chinese organized crime paralleled those efforts. The same thing is happening whether it be in Italy or throughout Europe. When you have larger narco proceeds that need to be laundered back to Colombia, Mexico, or somewhere else around the globe, Chinese money launderers are relied upon to do that on a much greater scale than they were in the past. They're very sophisticated, they're very professional, and they can get the job done quickly.
C'è uno studio che ritiene che solo di depositi illegali nei paradisi fiscali da parte delle mafie italiane ci siano fondi per circa 3.000 miliardi di euro. Ed è una montagna di soldi che devono essere riciclati e normalizzati, tra virgolette. L'esigenza primaria dell''ndrangheta oggi è quella di riciclare i soldi. E lo fanno in 1000 modi, attraverso i paradisi fiscali, utilizzando meccanismi diversi. Mi chiamo Michele Albanese, sono un giornalista, vivo in Calabria, mi occupo di cronaca nera e giudiziaria e delle dinamiche del porto prevalentemente. Il porto di Gioia Tauro è un porto realizzato a casa dell''ndrangheta. Solo con la cocaina che può essere passata da Gioia Tauro arriviamo a cifre imponenti che si aggirano intorno ai 40-45 miliardi di euro. Significa 2 finanziarie dello Stato italiano.
The 'ndrangheta, it was born in the province of Reggio Calabria and in particular in the mountains of Aspromonte. Aspromonte is one of the most geographically challenging areas of Calabria. It is a constellation of about 33 villages all around the same mountain area. The San Luca-based clans are well versed in particularly important for the cocaine trade, arriving at the Porto Gioia Tauro still today.
Ora stiamo entrando al terminal portacontainer. Qui si muovono circa 4 milioni di container all'anno. Ci sono dei momenti in cui possono essere accatastati anche 150.000 container. L''ndrangheta negli anni ha dimostrato sempre un interesse nei confronti di infrastrutture strategiche come questa. Sono il tenente colonnello Danilo Persano, sono il comandante del gruppo della Guardia di Finanza di Gioia Tauro. Questa è la porta del Mediterraneo. Abbiamo visto un crescendo anche di sequestri, si è passato dalle circa 6 tonnellate del 2020 di cocaina sequestrata proveniente dal Sud America alle 17-16 tonnellate nel 2021 e nel 2022.
Nelle ultime indagini è emerso una capacità di queste organizzazioni criminali e di soggetti cinesi di ricevere ingenti somme di denaro in Italia e di farle ritrovare nel paese di destinazione indicato appunto dai soggetti committenti dei servizi senza un trasferimento fisico delle somme di denaro, quindi senza che potesse essere tracciato il trasferimento del flusso finanziario. E questa è una grande opportunità criminale perché evita appunto la tracciabilità del flusso finanziario ed è questa un'emergenza nuova, un'emergenza che introduce una forma di pagamento diversa delle spedizioni di narcotraffico che in passato non avevamo rilevato. Un'organizzazione che è in grado di trasferire milioni e milioni di euro da un posto all'altro del pianeta evidentemente non può essere un'organizzazione di basso profilo, deve essere un'organizzazione che ha una capacità economica.
Qua siamo a Piazza Vittorio, il posto dove sostanzialmente si organizzano, si incontrano varie organizzazioni criminali. Qui vengono presi gli accordi e poi in funzione degli accordi presi e in funzione della necessità del quantum da movimentare, i soggetti poi vengono indirizzati presso dei centri di consegna e di raccolta di denaro occulto. Allora, più avanti sulla destra abbiamo un altro centro di raccolta occulta che è stato coinvolto nelle indagini. Io sono il colonnello Marco Sorrentino, sono il comandante del GICO, ossia del Gruppo Investigazione Criminalità Organizzata del Nucleo di Polizia Economico-Finanziaria di Roma. Stavamo eseguendo un'indagine di narcotraffico anche internazionale. Seguendo quella che ritenevamo inizialmente essere una consegna di droga, questo corriere si presentò presso un esercizio commerciale a ridosso della stazione Termini, dove consegnò quanto portava al seguito all'interno di uno zainetto. Nei giorni successivi continuiamo a questo punto ad eseguire attività di appostamento presso questo esercizio commerciale e ci rendiamo conto che solo nella giornata successiva registriamo visivamente i militari che sono lì in appostamento occulto, registrano all'incirca una ventina di consegne con le stesse modalità. Siamo stati in grado di ricostruire movimentazioni finanziarie verso la Cina per 53 milioni di euro. E in un periodo, in un lasso temporale molto ristretto.
L'intero sistema antiriciclaggio internazionale è fondato sull'idea che il denaro si sposti. Nel caso dell'underground banking il denaro può non spostarsi. L'intero sistema dei controlli che salta. I dati disponibili indicano che gli outbound verso la Cina nel 2012 equivalevano circa a 2,5 miliardi di euro e che invece nel 2022, quindi dopo soltanto 10 anni, si aggirano nell'ordine di poche decine di milioni. Una parte della spiegazione è rappresentata dall'espansione dei circuiti di underground banking. Questa rete di cambisti clandestini è una rete che dal Medio Oriente giunge fino in Cina, passando per il Pakistan e tutto lascia pensare che questa dorsale di movimentazione finanziaria clandestina sia utilizzata anche a scopi di finanziamento del terrorismo.
Sono delle condotte seriali, precise, ben determinate, che danno a chi si avvale della loro opera una sicurezza, una tempestività nelle transazioni. Io sono il colonnello Francesco Ruiz, comandante del Nucleo di Polizia Economico-Finanziaria di Roma, nella Guardia di Finanza. Il denaro illecito può essere immesso in maniera indisturbata nel circuito finanziario internazionale, aggirando quelli che sono presidi antiriciclaggio previsti dall'Unione Europea, e quindi una delle strategie che vengono adottate è una molteplicità di trasferimenti estero su estero prima di arrivare a destinazione.
È uno strumento sofisticato che gode sicuramente di una rete di protezione elevata e consente il riciclaggio di ingenti somme di denaro dall'Italia verso la Cina e viceversa. Mi chiamo Alessandra Cerreri, sono il sostituto procuratore distrettuale della Direzione Distrettuale Antimafia di Milano. Le difficoltà maggiori derivano dal fatto che non riusciamo a ricostruire tutte le compensazioni, anche perché una volta arrivato in Cina cessa la tracciabilità del bonifico bancario ed è difficile trovare collaborazione delle autorità cinesi per la tracciabilità.
But first up tonight, more students overdosing at a local high school. This time it's happening in Loudoun County.
All believed to be fentanyl-laced pills.
I like talking to the addicts, figuring out their story, figuring out how it was. They start telling you about how, they were prescribed medicine, then they went to the heroin, all right, and got addicted to the heroin, and the heroin just wasn't the high, wasn't getting, they were taking more and more of the heroin, and then the fentanyl came on the market, and it was so much stronger, and that's all they wanted. The cartels, they see the opportunity to make money, and it's just like the street dealers around here. They see the opportunity to make the quick money, and they can make a lot of money real fast. I'm Deputy Will Sullivan with the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. I'm assigned to the Tactical Support Unit. I also work with our Drug and Gang Unit, and I do traffic stops for them too. Fentanyl, it's blown up in this area. It's a really horrible, horrible drug, what it's done to people. And we're getting more and more of it on the street now. You used to get just a little bit of it, now you're getting a lot of it. It's taken over people's lives. They're making lots of money on this stuff. And the dealers push and push more and more, and you're getting busts now where you're getting thousands of pills at a time. Lots and lots of money in cash.
We're seeing the end result of what is an international major problem. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm the sheriff here in Loudoun County, Virginia. Been the sheriff for just over 12 years, just got reelected. Prior to that, I served 23 years with the Drug Enforcement Administration all over the globe. This is a photo of me and sitting in the field of poppies up there by the northwest area of Pakistan, near the Deer District up there, not too far from, I don't believe, from the Khyber Pass. If you look back to 2020 or so, you had about 93,000 overdoses nationally, overdose deaths nationally, okay? So you jump up a year, then it goes up to like 103,000 in 2021. 2022, it goes up to 106,000, and last year it's 112,000. We're losing more people in a year to drug overdoses than we lost soldiers in Vietnam over a 10-year period, twice as many. So this is really significant, and this is something that we really have to take head on in every direction because it's so prevalent, and we really need to stop this. The problem with fentanyl is that you can produce so much, and it takes so little to overdose. All you're talking about a lot of pills that you can get across the border, and it doesn't take up much space, and it's so deadly, and it's easy to distribute. This story is about greed. They don't care about parents losing their kids. They don't care about kids losing their parents. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is this, and it's something that we've got to do everything we can to stop.
The Select Committee will come to order. At the outset, I want to recognize that we are privileged to be joined today by families who have been directly impacted by the fentanyl crisis here in the United States. This hearing and the information that we are about to provide is for them and for those that they have lost. Mr. Donovan, you are recognized for your opening remarks.
Good morning, Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Krishnamurthy, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Ray Donovan. I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify before you today on the pressing issue of the fentanyl crisis and China's role in feeding this emergency, striking Americans in areas of public health, law enforcement, and national security. Being as deadly as fentanyl was, we said enough's enough, and we started bringing all the elements of the government together to really focus our energies and our efforts towards these groups because it was a national security issue. It was a matter of life and death. Project Sleeping Giant was our intent to put a big spotlight on Chinese organized crime and criminal groups that work hand in hand with Mexican cartels worldwide.
So when Ray Donovan told me about this Operation Sleeping Giant that he had set into motion in around 2016, I started to research this operation and could find only a single reference to it in a budget document, in a federal budget document, anywhere, really, which seems to suggest that the DEA wasn't taken as seriously as it might have been. There really wasn't enough of a link up between the various arms of law enforcement, between the Treasury, which is supposed to monitor cash transactions, between the FBI, between the Department of Justice. These were not really as integrated as you might have hoped in the face of a completely new threat.
I was a special agent in charge for the Special Ops Division, and Chris was coming into headquarters. And so what I did was I asked Chris to be in charge of what we call the counter threat team.
So as this threat was evolving, the insight was evolving, Project Sleeping Giant was created to gather whatever we could pull in that was judicially acquired or through our sources. We did that, and we started to gather insight, and then we were able to provide insight to the field. How is your case in LA, a money launderer, connected to command and control in New York? How is this seizure that happened in Denver? How is that connected to command and control in New York? And it's amazing when you get agents in the room and we talk about these cases, and we would have strategy meetings under the umbrella of Project Sleeping Giant. We have great human sources that we've recruited over decades. They started to provide information. We started to understand that there was this global network that was at scale, that could move money with speed within a day, unheard of before. We want to talk about the Zhishi Li investigation, and he pled guilty here recently in the Eastern District of Virginia. And he was an amazing money launderer. And he was the first one that we investigated, and we took down his organization. He had a casino in Central America that he had established. He had strong triad links back in mainland China. He traveled there, and he had a sophisticated network within the United States to pick up those funds. And Lee was one of those brokers that was at a very high level. So what it allowed us to do was gather that information, that intelligence, gather that evidence. We had an opportunity through the investigation to acquire ledgers and transactions and what he had been participating in. So it was what I would call a traditional takedown. We got the whole network. So I had the opportunity to sit in those debriefings. And I was floored by the scale that this was happening, the level of discipline, the level of sophistication. And you can imagine dozens of Zhishi Lis operating in the United States, Mexico, Central and South America, establishing casinos, establishing front businesses. Very difficult to do. Another component of the challenge, there's not very many Mandarin speakers in DEA. There's not very many Mandarin data scientists in DEA.
The challenge of getting people with good Mandarin skills and Chinese cultural background is that security people are very reluctant when somebody comes in and they do have good Chinese, but they also have an extensive network of relationships in China. My name is Dennis Wilder. I spent 36 years in the Central Intelligence Agency. I worked at the White House for George W. Bush as his special assistant and senior director for East Asia. The fentanyl issue has been an enormous domestic issue in the United States. And China's role in the sale of precursors to drug dealers has been a big thorn in the side of US politics. So the Biden administration for quite a while now has been trying to get the Chinese to restart our cooperation, which ended in 2019, on this topic. We have very quickly moved to a mode where the Ministry of Public Security in China and other organizations seem to be cooperating quite closely to begin to try and shut down the fentanyl flow from China.
Mr. President, critical global challenges we face, from climate change to counter-narcotics to artificial intelligence, demand our joint efforts.
Both the United States and China were seeking to put a floor underneath the free fall of the relationship. The level of tensions and hostilities have been the greatest in decades. I am Wonderful Bob Brown, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, where I direct Brookings' work on transnational threats such as illegal economies, organized crime, terrorism, civil war. The anti-money laundering element is now part of this counter-narcotics cooperation. The illicit side of the informal banking system, the underground banking system, grew in tandem with the regrowth of the Chinese triads in the 1980s and particularly 1990s. Just as China was liberalizing, opening up economically, criminal groups like the triads were growing and expanding their reach. First in Southeast Asia, then into the Pacific countries of New Zealand and Australia, subsequently to other parts of the world.
There have been whole books written on organized crime in China historically, and this is not a new problem. The Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, used them during the Civil War. The Communists used them during the Civil War and afterwards. Places like Hong Kong, we have seen the government using them to go after democracy protesters. In China today, there are many business people, entrepreneurs with large amounts of money who are scared of the Chinese government. Xi Jinping in recent times has been cracking down on private entrepreneurs. People have disappeared in the business community without any information, not even put into the legal system in China, simply taken into custody. And so we see the business class in China looking to get some of their money out as an insurance policy. I'm sure you've heard the stories of Singapore, where a huge number of these business people are setting up bank accounts, offices. And there is a real question of how they're getting this money out of China, since there are strict controls on taking money out of China. And I think the answer is, of course, they're going through money laundering schemes and illegal activities to do this.
We hear experts tell us that the movement of illicit Chinese money, of capital flight from China these days, is a virtual tidal wave. And there are very good reasons for that. The Chinese capital markets are in really bad shape. Chinese stock indices have been plunging. Chinese property values have been going down sharply. So there's all kinds of incentives for Chinese people to send their money abroad, either to invest in foreign assets or simply to buy stuff. In the past, we've looked at this issue, and several $100 billion US worth of capital flight has exited China and gone around the world. At the moment, it's quite possible that the amount of Chinese money leaving China exceeds even those very high levels. The National Crime Agency of the UK has actually given it a formal name. It's called Informal Value Transfer System, IVTS, and it really lies at the heart of the movement of Chinese illicit money all over the world.
This is more overt now as a service. Some of them are advertised on the internet. Some of them are advertised on social media. Crime as a service and laundering as a service has become a much bigger thing. I'm Sal Melky. I'm the head of illicit finance in the National Economic Crime Centre. The National Economic Crime Centre is part of the National Crime Agency. An underground banker might be sat in the centre of dozens, maybe even hundreds of transactions, and that just shows how sophisticated they need to be in terms of their operations. So they need to be a professionalised outfit. They need to be highly organised. They need to operate almost like a bank, keep ledgers, understand the scale of the cash pools in various different jurisdictions, understand the liquidity available to them. And that's not easy. So to do that, you need infrastructure and you need clever people, sophisticated people, and you need lots of people. It's something that we're seeing as a growing threat to the UK and across the world. Since capital controls were imposed in China, it's become much harder for Chinese citizens to get money outside of China, to spend that money abroad. So for example, if you want to get £1 million out of China, so you're transferring £1 million worth of value from one country, in this case China, to the UK. So by exchanging that value, that pool of cash, that money needs to exist in a separate jurisdiction. So what underground bankers are doing is turning to organised criminals as a readily available source of cash and liquidity to be able to settle those remittances. So they are tied in with organised crime in the United Kingdom, who generate huge amounts of cash, usually from the drugs trade, and they're using that liquidity in that trade to settle the remittances, in this example, to allow that £1 million to be transferred out of China and into the UK. Underground bankers will use a lot of methodologies to get that illicit cash into their hands and into the mainstream financial system. Money mules are a really common tactic, and they can often be people that are unwitting or people that don't fully understand the criminality that they're involved in. What they'll do is advertise on social media and say, would you like some money? And all you need to do in exchange is let us use your bank account. What they'll also do is create more bank accounts outside of the mainstream financial institutions and look towards electronic money institutes or challenger banks, where actually you can set up bank accounts far more quicker, and the level of onboarding for those bank accounts are less rigorous. So you can do it on a mobile phone app. If you can get 10, 20, 100 people to work for your organisation, then you can smurf that money into the legitimate financial institutions, and that means breaking it down into smaller chunks that are hard to detect.
They're undermining the banking system, and they're exploiting the banking system. Financial institutions don't have the benefit of the intelligence that the federal government has.
Il crimine organizzato, le mafie, hanno anche una straordinaria capacità di adattamento, hanno una straordinaria conoscenza della modernità, hanno una straordinaria conoscenza delle tecnologie, sono continuamente un passo dinanzi a noi.
Forse un giorno le mafie con i loro soldi illeciti potranno condizionare le scelte economiche e sociali di vari paesi, non solo democratici, ma soprattutto totalitari. E nel mondo ce ne stanno tantissimi.
I do think about it often. I gave it everything I had. I left it all out in the field. It's an uphill battle. And it continues to be an uphill battle. The money continues to flow, the technology continues to advance. The criminal groups are more and more interconnected. They're not going to stop.